This is Breaking Sales, a nonconformist take on rejecting the sales status quo. Join the Lap and 180 team as we break the tried and died sales tactics and techniques that are failing you and your prospects.
Hi, Kristie.
Hey, Pam.
This is the first episode you and I have done together.
By ourselves. Dan has left us on our own. Watch out.
Without supervision today. We're without supervision.
The kids are going to go crazy.
That's right. Yes, they are. Well, and it's an interesting subject we're talking about today. So we're going to talk about accountability. And Kristie, why are we talking about this today?
I am asked constantly by friends, peers, and those that we work with, what is the number one attribute or skill set that you would say results in peak performance? And it's always tough to answer with one, but I think this one is always near the top, if not the top, that high performers have an exceptional skill and discipline around making sure that they are the most determined and willing to be consistent and disciplined with their process, no excuses, no questions, all the time. All the time. It's constant peak performance, even with the stuff we don't necessarily want to do or that they don't want to do.
Well, and I find it interesting too that the more I kind of get into this and the high performance and the behaviors, the more you read about, to your point, high performers crave accountability. They don't hide from it and they can never have enough of it, which I found interesting too. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit. So we know it's an attribute of a high performer. We know it's one of the top attributes of a high performer. So your opinion, Kristie, then why is it so difficult if we darn well know that staying accountable to a process that ensures we're creating new habits and skills, getting out of our comfort zones, why is it so hard?
Because we're human.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah, I think it is so easy to rationalize and justify why we're not in the mood or just aren't feeling our best, or we just don't want to do something in the moment that we've assigned to do it. And I think it's getting harder and harder and harder in the world that we live in with all of the technology and everything constantly poking and trying to distract us from what we potentially need to be doing that's not right in front of us.
Okay. So I think the first question we all have to ask ourselves is, do we really understand what accountability is? And then number two, do we understand that it's not going to be easy? Because if we really are staying accountable to a consistent process that allows us to become high performers, it's going to be uncomfortable a lot. And so this piggybacks on what I've been trying to challenge myself around more with accountability. I kind of grew up in an environment where accountability was maybe not looked upon as favorable. Like if you needed help staying accountable, you shouldn't need help staying accountable. And it was like, if you got motivated to do this on your own, then you shouldn't be doing it. And so I like the piece that nobody should shy away from accountability, and let's all just recognize we do need it, or we'd be already realizing our potential. I mean, I hit roadblocks all the time when it comes to my growth. And if I didn't have you as an accountability partner and Dan always questioning me and pushing me, I wouldn't be there. So I don't think it's a bad thing that we have to be held accountable.
But I think there's a very distinct difference that is important to point out, that accountability doesn't mean micromanaging. I think if people need micromanaging, then there's an issue. There's something that we need to look inward. I see micromanagement as that you need someone essentially babysitting you and proactively asking you, did you get this done? Did you do this task? Did you do this assignment? And then having to chase you to figure out whether or not it got done to completion. Accountability, I see as support and challenge, that the ownership still lies within you. The ownership of that drive and that commitment is still coming from you. You assign what needs to happen. You've created and defined the process. You've set out when you need to do what and when and how frequently. And it's an outward sharing of commitment with a peer, a mentor, a leader, a coach, could be even someone at home that you care enough to sit in front of and say, I met my commitments to myself and to everyone else. And they're just asking you whether or not you were successful or not, in lessons learned from trying to execute on what you said you would do. There's a very big difference there.
And I like that. I like the way you verbalize that difference. So listeners, I do think, it's not that I need a babysitter. It's not that I need a babysitter. And maybe that was how I mistook why I shouldn't need accountability. Because you're right, I don't need a babysitter, but I do need support and I want to be challenged as to why I potentially am not hitting my goals, or maybe my goals aren't stretch enough goals. So I like that distinction.
I think too, you and I grew up in a different environment around this. So, I think being an athlete and having that accountability from a very young age as a swimmer, it was only a natural progression of a coach saying, okay, why are you struggling to hit your time? Or why are you struggling to make this event and make this cut that you want to hit? It was always that challenge and support to look inward to say, what do we need to be doing different in practice? What do you need to be doing different with your diet? What do you need to be doing differently, quite frankly, in your free time and sleep and all of these other things, to say, we got to look big picture here. And that's why what I think healthy accountability is that person that's willing to help you think through, are you really doing all that you can, or do you need to be doing something different or more? Because it's really hard to do that on our own. And morphing into the professional world, that's what you've become and Dan has become for me. I think we do that for each other.
Oh, 100%. And I need that. I mean, I'll be clear. I'm not afraid to tell anybody who's listening to this that I need accountability. I need the support and I need to be challenged. I still find myself sometimes making excuses for why I can't do something frequently. So I don't think that piece ever goes away. And I consider myself a highly disciplined human being. I mean, I thought I was disciplined before. It is nothing like it is today. And I still need the accountability, without a doubt.
Ditto.
So I'm going to read this definition. I liked this. And I think it's good as we start talking about the different processes that we've experimented with when it relates to accountability. So I just Googled, what's the best way to describe accountability? And this is one of the first ones that came up. Accountability is when people take responsibility for their own actions. It's about taking initiative and recognizing not only that individuals have the power to cause problems, but also to fix them. So I like that definition as a basis for walking through the different processes that you and I have experimented with as it relates to accountability. All right, so we've defined it. We know what it is. We know why we need it and why it's different than being micromanaged or hiring a babysitter to make sure I do what I'm supposed to do. So if we think in that frame of support and challenging and asking each other the tough questions in order to make sure we're growing both personally and professionally. Kristie and I talked about this before we got on the podcast, and she's right that we have to look at accountability not only as professional, but accountability towards our personal growth as well. And for whatever reason, I think my personal growth tends to be easier for me than my professional growth.
I'm the opposite.
Is it? See, that's why I asked. Tell me why. Why you think it's easier for some people to grow personally, while it's easier for others to grow professionally via process with accountability?
I think it's whatever perspective and lens we view through. For me, I can only speak for me, and then I'll let you speak for you. For me, the business side, and this is no secret to Pam or Dan, but maybe a secret to some of the listeners, is I have a bit of perfectionism that I combat and fight every day in the workplace. And so for me to be accountable and committed to a growth business plan, I have to be okay with failure because those plans are designed to stretch my limits. And so it's really uncomfortable for me to put myself out there. So when left on my own, I will shy away from it and rationalize and justify why I can just wait and not do that right now. Versus when you're holding me accountable, when I'm sharing with you, I did this or I didn't do it, I feel that sense of responsibility to myself and to you to say, I did it, which helps me push through that discomfort in the time where I have to make the decision to act on it then and there. And from the personal side, though, a lot of those things, I don't have that same pressure that I put on myself that I do in the business world. And so that's why I view it differently.
That is so interesting. And I think for me, it's easier for me to push myself on the personal growth because my fear is driven by not being able to do what I want to do. Like that's a big deal to me. And everybody in my life, what's held them back is the personal growth side. So didn't learn enough, didn't pay enough attention to health, didn't pay enough attention to finances, whatever it is on that personal side. I don't ever want to be limited in what I'm able to do. And as you know, Kristie, like right now, it's always my goal around health is I want to continue to be as healthy as I can be to do this job for as long as I choose to do it. So it is funny. It's much easier for me to like crack the whip on myself personally than it is professionally because I just don't want to run out of steam. I don't want to run out of steam. Interesting. Okay, two really different perspectives. Okay, so now let's talk about the different processes that we've experimented with in order to stay accountable to growth. And again, folks, we're talking growth, personal and professional. So I'm going to have Kristie start with what we're both experimenting with this year, which is something new for Lap and 180.
Yeah, so you actually, I think, introduced me to it, and then I latched on quite hard. But it's a model from Jesse Itzler, so we can't claim that this is our own. But he has a fantastic model. It's called the Big Ass Calendar. And it essentially puts the entire year, each row is a month, every day of the month on the wall. And what it allowed me to do is really have a visual for all of the work that I'm doing on myself, both personally and professionally, as well as working in all of the fun things I want to do along the way. And so it really gives a good perspective of work hard and do all the things that you set out, and then you get to play hard and you can see that all laid out all at the same time. And it's really helped. And now having on the wall is one thing, meeting with you on a weekly basis to stay accountable to it is another. And we were 100% quarter one on our initiatives, week over week over week. And it makes a big difference.
Those of you that are listening that maybe don't have a defined process yet for accountability to growth, if you are that visual person, so Kristie mentioned you see the whole year, it is pretty cool to see your whole year laid out. And that if you stay the course week over week, month over month, you're going to see this huge yearly calendar of where you grew. And again, too, right? Jesse's all about work hard, play hard. The play's on there as well. And actually, I think that's helped me stay more accountable when I see, right, like the fun coming up. It keeps me accountable. It's been very interesting to experiment with this one this year.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worthwhile to mention some of the few things that we've assigned or defined to put on there because they have to be specific. I think that's one of the toughest parts for high performance planning and accountability is if the plan has ambiguity, then the actions will be ambiguous. And it's really hard to say, well, am I trending or am I not? It's nearly impossible. So the things that, for me is one podcast a week, one chapter a week of professional reading, my strength, my cardio workouts, my fitness, nutrition, water, intake getting logged every single day. And then the professional things that we have to stay accountable to as well, or want to stay accountable to advance within the business, are all on there and defined clear actions as well. The other thing I like about his model is that it stacks on each other. So you spend one quarter working on one habit, and then that becomes habit. And then you layer in a new one for second quarter and a new one for third quarter. I think a common misperception is that everything has to be done right out of the gate Q1. And that's why a lot of business plans or life plans are set up for disaster, because it's changing too much at once. So I like the layering plan of initiatives that you can be more accountable to in a better way to make it more routine and discipline.
And then hopefully, like you said, by the end of the year, you've got 4 new habits that didn't exist a year ago. And that's pretty compelling. And folks, I got to tell you too, when you start getting all your sticky notes out and you start writing everything up, I mean, you look at this board and you're like, son of a bitch, I'm going to be accomplished by the end of this year. Like, it's pretty cool to see it. You're like, I'm going to do all this. So I think that's the other piece on the visual too, is you're like, wow, who can say they've accomplished all of this in a year's time? But it's layered to the point that you don't feel overwhelmed by it at all. All right, so I'm going to talk about, so we've got Big Ass Calendar from Jesse Itzler. One of the first things we did at Lapin to start experimenting with a process for accountability, we called it daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. So those of you that really don't have a process to stay accountable to personal and professional growth, this could be a really good entry point in for you. And basically what you do and what we would do is we would just write up on a whiteboard, what is the one thing I need to implement every day that doesn't exist today that's going to point towards my growth? What is the one thing every week, every month, and every quarter? So again, it's kind of an entry point. It's not overwhelming. You start small, but you're going to be doing one new thing every day, one new thing a week, one new thing a month, and one new thing a quarter. Now, that was a good entry point. I would say as a team, Kristie, did we do daily, weekly, monthly for a good 2 years?
Yeah.
I think it was a good 2 years.
Yeah, I think so.
So one of my mentors, her name is Claudia Mandato, she challenged me to say, okay, we need a really robust process. She's a client. She said, we need a really robust process for our client-facing folks and our sales-facing business development folks that kind of puts process on steroids a bit. And so Lapin 180 went down this path and landed on Brian Moran's 12-week year. And as a firm, I can tell you personally, I've been doing that one for 7 years. This is the first year I'm not utilizing a 12-week because we're experimenting with the Big Ass Calendar. But the 12-week year is unique. And Kristie, maybe I'll let you talk about the 12-week year first in terms of your perceptions on how it was a little bit of a shift from the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly.
I liked the 12-week year because I think what resonated the most with me is that it takes something from a annual thinking perspective and brought it into a shorter view. It's really hard to think, oh, these are my annual goals and this is what I want to accomplish. And it's somewhat overwhelming on how I want to get there and all of the different things I want to do. But when it took that, okay, you have 12 weeks to accomplish your milestone goals, that was a lot more feasible for me to think through and define. I think paired with that is his perspective that it places a higher level of focus and urgency on those actions. And what really resonated with me in that book is if we all viewed it like we were going on vacation, we get super focused and we get so much more done and we're so much more efficient when we're preparing to go away on vacation. And the 12-week year and that shorter focus of you have those 12 weeks to accomplish this milestone, that focus intensified like I was going on vacation and had to get prepared and execute. And it works. It changes that model of thinking and becomes more tangible and doable.
And I would tell you folks, if that's what you struggle with, is you kind of look at things and say, well, I've got a whole year to accomplish this, or my goodness, it's February. Why are you asking me about this goal? I just set it in January. If you need to operate with that urgency of, I don't have a year and I can't give myself a year, you will love the 12-week year. And you identify, so it has you kind of bucket your goals. So for me, like I have a financial goal, I have a growth goal as a coach, I have a health goal, and then I have an experience goal. And so you have to identify that 12-week goal, just one goal for each one of those. And then you've got to identify the actions that you have to achieve week over week to be standing that goal. And so you kind of take this annualized thinking and you put it into a 12-week block. And for those of us that struggle with urgency, this might be a better starting point for you than the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, if you need that urgency, because it does force you to put these milestones, as Kristie called it, in a 12-week time frame, not an annual time frame. Okay, so we've talked high performance. It's a massive behavior. We've talked about the differences between babysitting and support and challenge. We've also given our audience several different processes that they can think through regarding how to stay accountable to a process. Is there anything else, Kristie, that we've missed when it comes to talking about accountability? I could go on about this subject forever, but I know it's 22 minutes.
I'll cut you short after these two things. I think it's not only critical to identify what's going into those plans, but the why needs to be clear. Because the why behind the goals, what is it going to mean for me? What am I going to experience, observe? What's the impact it's going to have on me, my business, or others? That's so worthwhile, because when we're faced with having to make that decision, do I act on this or do I not, for the actions that lead to the success of that goal? That's what we need to tap into. And if it's not clear, that's harder to do. So I think that would be number one. I think the second is the structure that you and I have in place is a good model to share with someone of what healthy accountability looks like. So Pam and I meet every week on Fridays. It's a standing meeting. Do we have to make some modifications some weeks, of course, because Pam's traveling all over the planet. But we do have a time set every single week that we hold sacred. And if we have to move it, we move it, but we still have it. And it's a report out. It's here's what I committed to do. Here's what I did. Here are my lessons learned. If I didn't do something, Pam's going to be the first to say, why didn't you get it done? What's going to be different next week? And she's going to challenge me on it, because I'm probably making some excuses that are just excuses. So it's not Pam's job to babysit me on it, but she is there for me to use as a sounding board, or to call my ass out if it's needed, if I didn't do something that potentially I should, that I committed to.
So, and I think it's important too, on that note, same goes for me. There are plenty of times when Kristie's had to say, well, okay, why was that okay? The thought of having to verbalize why I made an excuse is very powerful on keeping me on track for the following week. And I know myself, and without that, I could easily fall off the rails multiple weeks. And it's funny, I'm very direct about, well, why didn't you get that done? And what was your problem there? And Kristie's it's so interesting how she'll ask it. It's very, well, that's interesting. Why do you think that happened? And it does. I just sit back and I'm like, I don't think I want to answer this because it sounds so stinking silly. But her forcing me to answer that, I'm like, you know what? It's not going to happen again. Don't worry about it. Like it just gets me right back on track. So it is extremely healthy, but it creates a nice level of positive tension that I know I need to answer to. I think that's important.
Yep. You're stuck with me for the rest of the year.
Ditto.
Week over week.
Ditto. All right, listeners, we hope you enjoyed this little episode about accountability. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us anytime.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Sales. If you want to get engaged with us outside of the podcast, be sure to go to our website, lappin180.com, go to contact us. You can also engage with us on LinkedIn at Dan Lappin or Lappin180.